A quiet village stands on the edge of forgetting. Ilara, a young storyteller, makes a choice that will define her world. She must find the lost echo stones, ancient artifacts holding the pure memories from the dawn of time itself. A creeping force known only as the silence is spreading, erasing history and song, consuming the last remnants of peace. To save the cultural memory of her people, she will risk everything on a quest most call a fool's errand. By the end of her story, you will understand how a single voice can challenge the void and redefine what it means to remember. Where are you listening from right now? And what is the local time where you are? Can a forgotten legend truly hold the key to our survival? The Whispering River lived up to its name. Ilara pushed her simple raft from the muddy bank, and the moment the current took hold, the voices began. They were not loud or frightening, but soft, intimate echoes of moments long past. She heard the cheerful laughter of a childhood festival, the comforting words of her grandmother, the very songs the silence was now consuming. The water itself seemed to shimmer with these ghostly reflections, each one a beautiful, painful hook, seeking to anchor her in nostalgia. To stop and listen was to be lost forever, lulled into a waking trance by the river of memory. Her knuckles were white on the rough-hewn pole, her focus a fragile shield. This was not a simple crossing. It was a test of will. A treacherous thought surfaced in her own mind, as insidious as the current. Was this quest not arrogance? Was she, a mere storyteller, truly the one to challenge the growing void? The river offered her the peace of surrender, the comfort of simply letting go and floating back into the beautiful past. For a heartbeat, the temptation was overwhelming. Then, her lips began to move, almost of their own accord. She recited the rhyme, the same one the village elders used to teach focus, her voice a steady whisper against the phantom chorus. The words were a tether to the present, to her purpose, a testament to the oral tradition that was her true strength. The raft spun, caught in a sudden eddy, and her satchel, filled with what little food and tools she had, slipped from its bindings and vanished into the luminous water. There was no time to mourn its loss. With a final, desperate thrust of the pole, she grounded the raft on the far shore. She stood on unfamiliar ground, shaken and lighter, her physical resources gone. Now, she would have to rely entirely on her wits and her deep knowledge of the land's stories to survive. The river had shown her that the silence was not a passive emptiness. It was a predator that used memory itself as a weapon. As she took her first step into the dense, unknown woods, a new sound reached her, a faint, melodic hum woven into the air between the ancient trees. It was a sound that promised neither peace nor peril, but a path forward. The melodic hum was a thread of pure sound, winding through the towering trees. Ilara followed it, her steps quiet on the soft moss, until she reached a sun-drenched clearing. There, she found the source of the song. A magnificent lumina deer lay on its side, its breathing shallow. One of its legs was badly injured, and the soft, ethereal light that pulsed within its magnificent antlers was flickering weakly, like a candle in the wind. The creature's large, dark eyes held no fear, only a deep, ancient weariness. Ilara's heart ached. She knew this being was a guardian of the old world, a living piece of the history the silence sought to erase. Her quest for the Echo Stone suddenly felt secondary to this immediate suffering. drawing on the knowledge passed down through generations of village healers. She moved slowly, gathering specific mosses and leaves she recognized from the stories. She worked with a gentle, focused care, cleaning the wound and applying the poultice, her movements a quiet ritual of respect. As the Lumina deer's breathing eased and the light in its antlers grew steadier, it struggled to its feet. With a soft nudge of its head, it beckoned for her to follow. It led her deeper into the woods, to a hidden grove where the air felt thin and the colors were muted. There, embedded in the bark of a great, ancient tree, was a shard of crystal. This was the first echo stone fragment, but its usual inner shimmer was dull, suppressed by the same gray film that had touched her village. A fierce urgency surged within Alara. She needed that shard. Yet, she saw how the grove's distress pained the deer, how its light dimmed just being near the silent stone. She could not simply rip it free. That would be an act of violence, no different from the silence itself. So she made a choice. She sat at the base of the tree, closed her eyes, and began to sing. It was not a song of power, but a gentle, restorative melody from her village's oldest lore, a tune meant for soothing frightened children and helping crops grow. Her voice, soft at first, filled the quiet space. As she sang, a subtle change occurred. The gray film on the echo stone began to recede, like frost melting under a morning sun. A soft golden light pulsed from the crystal, and with it, a single, clear memory washed over the grove. The memory of a long-ago sunrise, full of pure, undiluted hope. The Lumina deer stepped closer, its antlers now glowing brightly, and the entire grove seemed to sigh in relief, the colors returning to the flowers and the leaves. This small victory came with a grave revelation. As the stone awakened, it showed her a fleeting vision, a shadowy, formless presence actively seeking out such places of power, not just erasing them, but unweaving them from existence. The silence was not a passive decay. It was a hunter. The Lumina deer turned its head, its luminous eyes now reflecting not gratitude, but a sharp warning. It nudged her firmly toward a narrow, treacherous path that led up into the stark, cloud-wreathed mountains. The next trial would not be found in the gentle woods, but in the cold, unforgiving stone of the high peaks, where the air itself was thin on memory. The mountain path was a vertical library of forgotten time. Each handhold carved into the sheer rock face was not merely a physical aid, but a record of a hand that had climbed before her, their purpose and passage worn smooth by countless seasons. Alara's breath came in thin, ragged gasps, the high altitude clouding her thoughts with a dizzying fog. The profound isolation of the peaks pressed in on her, a silence far deeper than the absence of sound. It was the feeling of being the last conscious thing in a world succumbing to amnesia. Her progress was barred not by rock falls, but by puzzles. They were intricate sequences of symbols and tones etched beside the path, each one a lock that could only be opened by reciting the correct rhythm from the old legends. Her first attempts were clumsy, her voice weak and uncertain, but as she aligned her chant with the ancient patterns, something remarkable happened. The gray film of the silence, which clung to the stone like a lichen, would recoil. A faint, protective luminescence would briefly flare around her, a tangible shield forged from remembered song. This was not just about finding a path, it was about reclaiming it. The final challenge stood before a stone door, sealed for ages. The puzzle was simple and devastating. A small, crystalline basin demanded an offering, not of words, but of a memory made physical, an object of deep personal significance. Her hand went immediately to the simple locket at her throat, the only thing she had left of her grandmother. Inside was a tiny, woven lock of hair, a tactile echo of a beloved voice, and a comforting embrace. To surrender it felt like surrendering a part of her own soul. She stood there for a long moment, the wind whipping at her clothes, the weight of her choice immense. Then, with a resolve that quieted the storm in her heart, she unclasped the chain. She placed the locket in the basin. It did not vanish, but dissolved into a shower of soft, golden light that flowed into the stone door. With a deep, grating rumble, the door slid open. A surge of pure, warm energy flowed from the echo stone fragment in her pouch, its light glowing with a newfound intensity, as if acknowledging her sacrifice. But as the door opened, a cold dread prickled at the back of her neck. High on the cliffs above, she saw them, all slender and utterly still, their forms seeming to drink the light from the air. They were the silent watchers, and they had seen her act of remembrance. They now knew she was here. Pushing forward, she finally hauled herself over the last ridge and onto the summit. The vista that opened before her was breathtaking and deeply unsettling. Far below, cradled in a crater of black rock, lay a vast and perfectly placid lake. Its waters did not ripple or wave. They shimmered with a cold, mirror-like stillness, reflecting the bruised sky with an accuracy that felt unnatural. It was a place of profound quiet, and it pulsed with a silent, undeniable call. The lake of lost echoes was a mirror of sound. Its unnervingly still waters did not show her reflection, but instead captured the ghost of every voice that had ever spoken on its shore, holding them in a perpetual, overlapping chorus. Using reeds from the crater's edge, Alara constructed a small, fragile boat, her hands moving with an urgency fueled by the lake's silent call. As she pushed off, the surface remained unbroken, yet the air around her filled with a symphony of the past. Whispers of ancient arguments brushed against her ears, followed by the joyous laughter of a forgotten festival. Each echo was a shimmering thread of memory, and she had to carefully gather the ones that resonated with a specific, haunting dissonance, a melody of a promise shattered. Piecing them together was like trying to weave with fog, and the mental strain was immense. The beautiful echoes were the most dangerous, offering a warm, nostalgic embrace that made her want to drop her oars and simply listen forever. A soft, rippling disturbance in the water nearby broke the spell, a silent suggestion that she was not alone on this acoustic sea. Amid the cacophony, one voice rose above the rest, clear and filled with a profound sorrow. It was the voice of a leader, pleading for unity in a time of great division. This was not a tempting memory of peace, but a painful one of failure. Alara latched onto it, allowing its raw emotion to burn away her own weariness and reaffirm her mission. Instead of fleeing the lake's disorienting grasp, she made a critical choice. She held her activated echo stone fragment aloft, and the sorrowful plea flowed into the crystal, a permanent record of a critical moment in history. The moment the echo was secured, the lake reacted. The murky waters directly below her boat became transparent for a few heartbeats, revealing the elegant, sunken arches and pillars of a vast, submerged council chamber. This was the physical proof of the broken pact. But this act of preservation had a cost. From the newly revealed depths, a low, mournful cry resonated through the water and into the very bones of her boat. It was a sound of immense, ancient grief, a lament that seemed to both mourn the lost world and issue a somber warning. As she paddled desperately for the shore, that sorrowful cry followed her, a chilling reminder that some truths, once uncovered, cannot be unheard. The sorrowful cry did not fade but coalesced, the waters of the lake rising in a shimmering pillar before her boat. From the light and water emerged a being of breathtaking form, its body a cascade of liquid radiance, and its eyes holding the deep, cold silence of the abyss. This was the Weeping Guardian, the sentinel of the lost echoes, and it barred her path with an outstretched arm of flowing light. Its voice, when it spoke, was the sound of 1,000 muted whispers. It did not demand she leave. It demanded she prove her worth through the oldest currency of their world, a story. She must tell a tale so true, so resonant with the foundational memory of creation, that it could pierce the numb shell of its grief. Ilara felt the weight of every story she had ever learned press upon her. This was not a recitation for villagers by a warm fire. This was a trial for the soul of history itself. She closed her eyes, drawing not on practiced performance, but on the deepest well of her being, on the first story her own grandmother had ever whispered to her, the tale of the first dawn. She spoke of the time before light, when the world was a silent, formless potential. She did not describe it with grand language, but with the simple, aching wonder of that first, impossible moment, when a sliver of gold split the endless gray, when warmth first touched the cold stone, and the very air hummed with the birth of color and song. She poured into her, telling all the hope, fear, and raw, beautiful vulnerability of that primal beginning. A profound stillness fell over the lake. Then, a single, luminous tear traced a path down the Guardian's face of light. Where it fell upon the stagnant water, the gray film shattered and vanished, leaving a pool of clear, vibrant blue that pulsed with renewed life. From this purified center, a second echo stone fragment rose, drifting into Ilara's waiting hand. But her victory felt hollow as she looked upon the Guardian. Its immense sorrow was not a natural state, but a wound. The silence had not just surrounded this place, it had invaded the Guardian itself, systematically stealing the very memories it was sworn to protect. Her quest to gather echoes was directly opposed to its personal, profound loss. The obvious choice was to take the stone and continue her journey. It was the practical, the necessary path. But Ilara looked at this magnificent being, broken by the same force she fought, and she knew she could not be another taker in a world being emptied. She made a vow, her voice clear and steady over the quiet water. "I will not just take these memories," she promised. "I will help you find your own. I will help you remember who you are." The Guardian's light, which had been dim, flared with a sudden, shocked intensity. The alliance was forged not in strategy, but in shared restoration, a promise that immediately doubled her burden, even as it granted her a protector of immense power. As the purified waters continued to spread, the Guardian's form grew more solid, its voice less a whisper and more a clear chime. It confirmed a terrifying, hopeful truth. The silence's work could be undone. This small reclamation was proof. With a newfound focus, the being of water and light pointed a luminous finger toward a fissure in the crater wall, a dark entrance that seemed to swallow the sound. That is the Cavern of Whispers, it intoned, where the greatest concentration of echoes has gathered for protection. Your path lies there, but know this, storyteller. The cavern is now a beacon. The agents of the silence have felt this shift. They are watching, and they are waiting. The entrance to the canyon was a mouth of shadow, swallowing all light and sound. Ilara stepped inside, and the world went mute. The air grew thick and heavy, a physical pressure against her ears. This was the silence made manifest, a void that drank the very vibration of her breath. From her pouch, she drew the 2 echo stones. They flared to life, their combined golden light pushing back the oppressive gloom, carving out a small, safe sphere around her. Within this pocket of radiance, she could hear her own footsteps and the faint, reassuring hum of the stones themselves, tiny islands of memory in a sea of nothing. But the light was not infinite. She watched, her heart sinking, as a tiny flicker of energy winked out from one crystal, its inner glow dimming ever so slightly. To use them was to drain them. She had to move fast. The canyon floor was a treacherous path of loose shale and sudden drops. Ahead, a natural stone bridge arched over a deep chasm, its center crumbling into dust. As she edged onto it, the shadows at the edge of her light began to writhe. They did not attack, they whispered. The voices were her own inner fears given sound. "You are a fool to believe you can change anything," they murmured. "Your village is already forgotten. You are only delaying the inevitable." The stones felt heavier in her hand, their light wavering under the psychological assault. Each step across the bridge was a battle against the despair, the shadows seated in her mind. Halfway across, the shadows directly before her coalesced, pulling substance from the void. They formed the shape of her younger self, a girl with wide, uncertain eyes, clutching a story scroll she was too afraid to read aloud. The phantom mirrored her own remembered hesitation, a perfect echo of her deepest insecurity. For a moment, Ilara faltered, the memory a sharp pain in her chest, but then she did not deny it. She looked at the phantom and smiled, a sad, understanding smile. "I remember you," she said softly, her voice a beacon in the quiet. "You taught me the cost of silence." And with that acknowledgement, she embraced the memory, not as a weakness, but as the very source of her strength. The act of acceptance was a shield. The phantom of her younger self did not vanish in a burst of light, but simply dissolved, its doubt reabsorbed into her own fortified spirit. A low, grinding rumble filled the canyon, a sound of pure frustration. The retreating shadows did not scatter. They flowed together, merging into a towering, formless darkness that loomed over her, its silence now feeling deliberate and hateful. It had tested her with fear and with personal history, and it had learned that these tactics only made her stronger. Now it would try sheer, overwhelming force. Ilara ran, the light from the stones sputtering as she poured energy into her flight. She did not look back. She burst from the canyon's end and stumbled to a halt before a colossal gate of carved white stone, so old it seemed grown from the mountain itself. It was ornate beyond belief, covered in glyphs depicting the great tales of the time before history. The gate stood slightly ajar, just wide enough for a single person to slip through. From within, a chorus of faint, desperate voices washed over her, a symphony of trapped echoes calling out from the deep dark. The Cavern of Whispers awaited, a treasure house of everything she sought to save. But as she stood there, catching her breath, she knew the towering shadow at her back was not gone. It was simply waiting for her to lead it to the greatest concentration of memory left in the world. The Cavern of Whispers was a cathedral of memory. Its walls were not stone, but a forest of crystalline structures, each one a frozen, shimmering tear of captured sound. The air hummed with the trapped chorus of countless voices, a beautiful, desperate symphony. Alara moved through the maze of chambers with painstaking care, her footsteps silent on the soft, crystalline dust. The path was a labyrinth of echoing chambers, where a single misspoken word could be caught and repeated back from a dozen directions, creating a disorienting wall of sound that could lead her in circles forever. Her focus had to be absolute. She reached out with hands that trembled only slightly, her touch as gentle as a breath on the fragile crystal formations. One by one, she harvested the echoes, not by breaking the crystals, but by letting the activated echo stones in her pouch draw the shimmering memories into themselves. With each new voice saved, the stones at her hip grew warmer, their light shifting from a flickering gleam to a steady, harmonious golden radiance that pushed the cavern's inherent gloom back several paces. The oppressive silence was in full retreat here, replaced by this growing choir of the remembered. Then she saw it, a massive, magnificent crystal, dark and deeply flawed with internal fractures. The echo within was ancient, its voice a thin, reedy whisper of immense weariness. It was the memory of a peacemaker, a voice from the era of the Great Schism. To free it would be a delicate, time-consuming task, a risk with the silence's presence a tangible chill in the air. Yet she could not leave it. She chose to spend the precious moments, her fingers tracing the cracks, her own voice humming the restorative melody she had used in the forest, coaxing the memory out with infinite patience instead of force. The moment the ancient echo flowed into her stone, the cavern itself seemed to sigh in relief. The peacemaker's memory unfolded within her mind, not as a full story, but as a single, critical clue, a vision of the first moment the Great Pact was broken, not by malice, but by a profound, collective fear of being forgotten. This fear, the memory revealed, was the fertile ground from which the silence first took root. The revelation was immediately costly. A deep, groaning crack echoed through the chambers as the now empty crystal shattered, its collapse triggering a chain reaction. The walls began to weep shards of crystalline memory, the entire section of the cavern trembling apart around her. Alara ran, the empowered echo stones lighting her way through the raining fragments. As she burst back out into the open air, the peacemaker's echo, now safe within her stone, pulsed with a final, urgent direction. It guided her gaze across the desolate landscape, toward a distant, mist-shrouded marsh. The answers you seek, the echo seemed to whisper, lie where history was deliberately buried. You must find the Sunken Archive. The marsh was a graveyard of forgotten knowledge. Alara waded through the murky, waist-deep water, her movements slow and deliberate, to avoid disturbing the thick carpets of algae that clung to the surface like burial shrouds. The air was thick with the smell of decay and ancient, waterlogged parchment. Following the echo stone's faint pull, she found it, a half-sunken archway of pale stone leading down into the dark. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she recalled a legend of the pearl divers from the southern coasts, a tale of holding one's breath, not just with the lungs, but with the mind, focusing on a single, calm thought to stretch a single moment into many. She dove. The water was shockingly cold, but just a few strokes down, her head broke not into more water, but into a pocket of stale, cool air. She was inside the Sunken Archive. The cavernous hall was a ghost of its former self, its towering shelves leaning precariously, laden with scrolls so damaged by water and time they looked like fragile sculptures of ash. Flickering, silent forms glided between the stacks, the spectral librarians, their features indistinct, but their presence radiating a deep, protective solemnity. They were the last custodians of this drowned history. As Alara moved, the floor trembled, and a cascade of water poured from a crack in the ceiling, the water level in the chamber visibly rising. She was running out of time. The librarians did not attack. They simply appeared before her, their silence a question. They pointed to a specific sealed cylinder of treated leather, high on a crumbling shelf. It was the Chronicle she sought, but to reach it, she had to pass their test. They demanded a story, not from their own archives, but from her. They wanted something new, something living. Understanding their profound loneliness, Alara did not recite a grand epic. She sat on a dry fragment of a fallen pillar and began to share the simple, everyday stories of her village, the tale of the baker, who always added an extra roll for a hungry child, the legend of why the willow tree by the stream wept, the song the weavers sang to bless new cloth. She gave them not history, but heart. As she spoke, the spectral forms gathered closer, their silence becoming one of rapt attention. When she finished, they did not merely grant her the Chronicle. One of them reached out an ethereal hand and touched her forehead. A forgotten melody flowed into her mind, a song of binding, a harmonic pattern meant not to destroy the silence, but to weave the scattered echoes back into a cohesive whole. This was the strategy she had been missing. The moment the song took root in her memory, the archive groaned in protest. A massive section of the wall gave way, and a torrent of water exploded into the chamber. The librarians pointed frantically toward a dark opening near the floor, a hidden waterway leading out. Clutching the sealed Chronicle, Alara took a last breath of the archive's air and plunged into the raging current. The tunnel was a terrifying, claustrophobic ride in absolute darkness, the water pulling her relentlessly forward. Just as her lungs began to burn, she was ejected into clear, calm water and surged to the surface, gasping. She found herself floating in the center of a perfectly serene valley, its air sweet and warm. Every leaf on every tree seemed to hum with a gentle, persistent vibration. This was a place where the memory of peace was not a story, but a tangible presence in the very atmosphere. The very air of the valley was a symphony. Each breath Alara drew carried a different note, a fragment of the great accord's original, foundational music. She stood perfectly still, her eyes closed, listening. The wind was a playful but unreliable conductor, offering a beautiful chord one moment and scattering the notes into chaos the next. To reassemble the melody, she had to become an instrument herself. She began to hum, matching the stray notes that drifted past, weaving them together into a cohesive, protective tune. It was a delicate act of creation, a listening so deep it felt like a form of prayer. As the melody grew stronger and more complete, a sphere of harmonious sound solidified around her. The effect on the valley was immediate and breathtaking. Where her feet touched the ground, Flowers of pure light unfurled from the soil, their petals humming in soft unison. In her pouch, the echo stones flared with such intensity, they felt warm against her hip, their inner light swelling to a brilliant, near full capacity. The void's influence was being pushed back, not by force, but by a beauty it could not comprehend. This sanctuary, however, was fragile. The silence, sensing the resurgence, did not attack with form or shadow. It sent discordant, soundless gusts that sliced through the harmonious wind. These gusts carried no music, only a vacuum that threatened to unravel her hard-won melody. One such blast of absolute quiet struck her sphere, and the protective song wavered, the notes stumbling over each other. The light flowers at the edge of her influence dimmed. She realized she could not hold this harmony alone. Its power was meant to be shared, not guarded. Her moment of decision came when she noticed a small family of migratory songbirds watching her from a nearby branch, their heads tilted in curiosity. They were natural vessels for song. Instead of clinging to the melody as her sole weapon, she began to sing it aloud, slowly and clearly, directing the notes toward them. The birds, intelligent and receptive, picked up the tune, their own clear voices weaving it into their complex migratory calls. The act of teaching, of giving the music away, did not diminish it. It amplified the harmony 100-fold, the birds carrying it to every corner of the valley, creating a lasting bastion of remembered sound. The triumph was short-lived. The amplified song acted like a beacon. To the north, the horizon darkened not with rain clouds, but with a profound absence of light. A massive, silent storm began to advance, its edges fraying the very air. It moved with a malevolent purpose, a centralized will that the formless shadows from the canyon lacked. The songbirds, who had just learned the melody of protection, now chirped in a frantic, urgent chorus. They swarmed around Alara, their small bodies nudging her toward a high ridge that overlooked the entire valley. She climbed, the empowered echo stones a comforting weight. From the summit, she looked down upon the approaching tempest. Its dark center did not swirl randomly. It pulsed, a slow, rhythmic beat like a silent heart, and it was moving directly toward her. The storm did not roar. It advanced with a profound and chilling quiet, a wall of nothingness that eroded the vibrant melody of the valley note by note. Alara stood her ground on the high ridge, the empowered echo stones blazing in her hands. She did not attack. Instead, she poured every ounce of her will into the harmonious song, weaving the light from the stones and the voices of the songbirds into a shimmering, resonant shield that arced before her. The wall of sound met the wall of silence in a conflict that had no crash of thunder, only a terrible, straining stillness. The silence tested her shield with tendrils of absolute vacuum, patches of void that sought to unravel the music and drain the hope from her heart. Each touch was an icy numbness, a temptation to simply let go and be absorbed into the quiet. She felt memories flicker at the edge of her consciousness, threatened with dissolution. It was a battle fought not with strength, but with sheer, stubborn remembrance. Then came a sound that shattered her concentration more completely than any silent assault, a sharp, clear crack. One of the echo stones in her hand fractured, a web of fine lines spreading across its surface. Its light, once so brilliant, dimmed by half. The shield wavered, and for a terrifying moment, the silence pressed inward. But the sacrifice had been made. The storm, as if satisfied with this new intelligence, ceased its pressure. It did not vanish, but withdrew, pulling its oppressive weight back across the valley like a receding tide, leaving behind an unnerving calm. It had learned the limits of her power. Alara looked at the cracked stone in her palm, its energy leaking away. She could have tried to hoard its remaining power for herself. It was the practical choice. Instead, she made a different calculation. With a decisive motion, she pressed the fractured stone into the bare rock of the ridge. Focusing the last dregs of its energy, she fused it there, a permanent ward, humming with the faint, enduring echo of the valley's protective melody. It was a beacon and a warning, a piece of her own strength, given to the land that would weaken any future incursions. The act left her depleted, the remaining stone in her pouch feeling suddenly, terribly alone. The songbirds, sensing her exhaustion, swarmed around her. Their chirps were no longer frantic, but insistent, tugging at the edges of her cloak. They led her down from the ridge, away from the scarred battlefield, toward a hidden glen deep within the valley's heart. Legends spoke of a recluse who dwelled there, a master of memory and form, known as the Last Echo Smith. If anyone could mend a broken stone, or forge a new understanding from the fragments of the old, it would be that solitary figure. Her steps were heavy, but her resolve was sharpened. The storm's tactical retreat was not a victory. It was a preparation. The final confrontation would demand not just what she carried, but everything she was. The glen was a workshop carved from living sound. Crystalline chimes hung from silver-leaf trees, each one humming a different, perfect note. In the center, an elderly woman with hands like polished river stones was carefully tapping a hairline fracture from a small, dormant echo stone. This was the Echo Smith, and she did not look up as Alara approached. Her silence was a wall as solid as the one Alara had faced in the canyon. The storyteller understood that words alone would not suffice here. She knelt, placing the sealed chronicle from the Sunken Archive on the mossy ground between them. Then, she closed her eyes and began to sing the Song of Binding, the forgotten melody gifted by the Spectral Librarians. Her voice was weary but clear, weaving the separate notes of the glen into the ancient, unifying harmony. The smith's hands stilled, her head tilted, listening not just to the song, but to the intent behind it. When the last note faded, the old artisan finally met Alara's gaze, her eyes sharp and discerning. "You carry a great weight," she said, her voice a low, resonant hum. "But weight can be used as a weapon or a foundation. How do I know your heart is not just another kind of hunger?" To prove herself, Alara was not asked to fight or to recite more lore. Her trial was one of crafting. For an entire day, she helped the smith gather rare minerals that sang when struck, their resonant frequencies essential for the repair. She learned to listen for the specific pitch of sun-bleached quartz and the deep tone of iron-rich hematite, understanding that true preservation required patience and a deep respect for the materials themselves. She was not taking, she was participating in the act of care. This demonstration of commitment softened the smith's distrust. That night, by the light of a forge fueled by resonant crystals, the artisan did not merely repair the cracked echo stone. She reforged it, using slivers of the minerals they had gathered, and impossibly, weaving in threads of the harmonious wind melody from the valley, she created a new lattice within the crystal. The stone that emerged was more vibrant and complex than before, its light pulsing with a resilient, layered music. It was a masterpiece, a beacon of hope made solid. The smith placed the enhanced stone in Alara's palm, its warmth now a steady, reassuring pulse. "This is a light the darkness cannot ignore," she warned, her tone grave. "To use its full power will be like shouting in a silent hall. It will call the master of the silence, a being of pure negation that feeds on the absence it creates. You will have one chance, when it is focused entirely on you, to strike at its heart." With the fortified stone glowing against her chest and the smith's solemn blessing echoing in her ears, Alara turned from the sanctuary of the glen. Her path was clear now, leading toward the epicenter of the void, a place the oldest tales named only in whispers. The final battle for memory would not be fought with an army, but with a single, defiant song at the heart of silence. The Blighted Plain was a canvas of absolute negation. Color had been leached from the earth, leaving a flat, gray expanse where even the wind made no sound. Alara's footsteps were swallowed by the ground, each one a struggle against the land's draining apathy. She held her echo stones before her, and their light carved out a small, temporary world of grass and gentle sound. Flowers of remembered sunlight bloomed under her feet, and the faint hum of a village lullaby filled the air. But the effort was immense. With each step, she felt a piece of her own vitality seep into the stones to sustain the fragile oasis, and the moment she moved on, the gray silence rushed back in to reclaim its territory. The plain tested her with more than exhaustion. Phantoms of her village appeared in the periphery, their voices clear and pleading. She saw her own hearth, warm and inviting, and heard her friends calling her name, urging her to come home, to rest. The illusions were perfect, crafted from her own deepest longings. To listen was to be trapped. She pushed forward, her focus locked on the stone's warm pulse, using their resonance as an anchor to the present moment and the grim necessity of her quest. The ground itself was treacherous, sometimes giving way beneath her boots to reveal patches of a deeper quiet, pockets of void that felt like stepping into a sudden, chilling emptiness. A new idea sparked within her weariness. She could not sustain these oases, but perhaps she could leave something of them behind. With great care, she began to fracture tiny shards from the edges of her empowered stones. Each sliver carried a faint charge of memory and light. At the center of every temporary oasis she created, she pressed one of these shards into the barren soil. The moment she did, the oasis stabilized, no longer dependent on her proximity. A single, steadfast wildflower would remain, humming its quiet song into the suffocating silence. It was a selfless act, a gift for any soul who might one day follow this same terrible path, and the creation of each small beacon filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. This trail of light, however, was a declaration of war in a land that demanded surrender. Each shard she left behind was a pinprick of defiance in the vast gray, and together they formed a luminous roadmap leading directly to her. She could feel a new attention focusing on her progress, a cold and calculating presence that now tracked her every move. The very act of hope had made her a target. Finally, the interminable plain came to an end. Before her stood a monolithic archway of black, seamless stone. It was utterly featureless, a void in the shape of a gate. From within its threshold, A dark energy pulsed with a slow, rhythmic certainty, a silent heartbeat that promised an end to all sound, all color, and all memory. This was not a place of conflict. It was a place of conclusion. The heart of silence awaited. The archway offered no resistance, only a chilling emptiness that pulled at the edges of her being. As Alara stepped into its threshold, the world dissolved into a cascade of her own deepest fears. She saw her village, not as it was, but as it would become, a place of hollow-eyed people who spoke in flat, emotionless tones, their stories and songs utterly erased from their minds. They looked right through her, their gazes empty, and she heard her own name spoken not with recognition, but as a meaningless sound. The illusion was a visceral, crushing weight, convincing her that her quest had already failed, that she was a ghost fighting for a world that no longer remembered she existed. Her own doubts, the very ones the whispering river had whispered, roared back with tenfold force. Then came the painful echoes, the memory of her grandmother's fading voice, the sight of her own home falling into disrepair, the feeling of being utterly alone in the woods with her satchel gone. Each one was a sharp sting of loss, a temptation to surrender to the grief. But in the center of the storm, she fixed her mind on a single, steady image, the face of a young child from her village, looking up at her with wide, trusting eyes as she told a story by the fire. She had made a promise to that child, to all the children, to preserve their future. That specific, loving memory became her anchor. She held it tight, a single point of light in the consuming dark, and took one step, then another, walking not away from the pain, but through it, her purpose a shield against the void. She emerged on the other side, her memories intact, but her spirit feeling raw and exposed. A deep, grinding rumble echoed through the space as the monolithic archway shattered into fine, black dust, sealing the passage behind her forever. She was now trapped within the very core of the silence, a domain where the rules of reality were dictated by negation. The air was thin and cold, and the ground beneath her feet felt insubstantial. Before her stretched a vast, hollow space, a cavern so immense its ceiling was lost in shadow. In the center of this nothingness, a figure of shifting shadows awaited her. It was not a monster of form, but a presence of profound absence, the architect of the silence. The figure of shifting shadows did not speak, for language was a form it had long since consumed. Its presence was the answer to a question never asked, a void that defined itself by what it erased. Alara felt its attention settle upon her, a pressure that sought to flatten the very contours of her soul. This was not a battle that would be won with strength or light, but with meaning. She began to speak. Her first story was a simple one, a tale of a farmer teaching his child the names of the stars. As the words left her lips, the echo stones at her hip flared, projecting the memory into the hollow space. A single, faint star winked into existence above them, its light a pinprick of defiance in the pervasive dark. The negation did not roar, it simply unwove the story. A wave of cold indifference washed over her, and the memory of the farmer's face, the warmth of his hand on the child's shoulder, flickered and vanished from her mind. It was gone, not just from the air, but from the library of her own experience. A cold dread coiled in her stomach. It was not attacking her body, but her very self. She pressed on, her voice gaining strength from a well of desperation. She told the legend of the river that learned to sing, her stones giving form to the shimmering, melodic water. A ribbon of soft blue and gentle sound wove through the cavern, and for a moment, the oppressive stillness retreated. The negation countered by taking the memory of her grandmother's favorite lullaby, the one that had always comforted her during storms. The loss was a physical ache, a hollow space where a cherished part of her childhood had been. The duel was a brutal exchange, a story for a memory. With each tale she gave to the world, a part of her own history was taken. She could feel the edges of her identity fraying, her past becoming a book with missing pages. The negation, sensing her weakening resolve, finally formed a proposition in the space between them, not with words, but with a direct, chilling certainty. It offered a pact. It would spare her village, granted a bubble of perpetual, quiet safety, untouched by the consuming void. All she had to do was lay down the echo stones and walk away, allowing the rest of the world to be forgotten. The temptation was a sweet, paralyzing poison. She could save them, she could go home, but as she looked at the offer, she saw its true shape. A peace built on a foundation of willful ignorance, a sanctuary that would forever be a monument to her betrayal of every other story, every other voice. Her refusal was quiet, but it echoed with the strength of the mountains she had climbed. True peace cannot be built on a lie, she declared. It cannot be bought by forgetting the suffering of others. To save one village by surrendering the world's memory would be the greatest silence of all. Her defiance was a spark in a powder keg. The negation's form contorted, not in anger, but in a shattering, agonized resonance. The offer had been a test, and her rejection broke a seal. The shifting shadows tore apart, and from its core erupted an agonizing chorus not of malice, but of 1,000, a million forgotten sorrows. The wails of lost children, the final sighs of faded cultures, the grief of unmarked endings. This was not a monster. It was a tomb, a sentient collection of every story that had ever ended in despair, every echo that had died without an answer. It was not spreading the silence. It was the silence, a being born from the world's unattended grief, now so vast and tangled it could do nothing but perpetuate its own nature. The revelation changed everything. To fight it was to fight sorrow itself. To destroy it would be to erase the evidence of countless tragedies. Alara understood now that the song of binding, the forgotten melody from the Sunken Archive, was not a weapon. It was a key. It was not meant to destroy the negation, but to finally, gently, lay it to rest. She closed her eyes, letting the last of her own cherished memories fortify her, and began to hum the first, soft notes of release. Her voice was no longer a shield, but an open door. Alara wove the ancient song of binding with the harmonious wind from the valley and the peacemaker's sorrowful plea, transforming the melody into something entirely new, a song of release. It did not push against the agonizing chorus of the negation. It met the wails of forgotten sorrows with profound empathy, acknowledging each loss, each tragedy, not as a thing to be feared, but as a story that deserved to be heard one last time. This was the most dangerous moment of her entire journey. To hold this perfect harmony required a complete surrender of her own defenses. A single note of fear or judgment would shatter the connection, and the raw, unattended grief of a million endings would flood into her, scouring her identity away until nothing of Alara remained. She did not fight the sorrow, she invited it in. "Join me," she sang into the cacophony, her spirit a calm harbor in the storm. "Your stories will not be forgotten. They will have a home." It was an offering of compassion, not destruction, a chance for these lost echoes to be woven into the renewed tapestry of history, their pain reconciled rather than eternally repeated. The effect was not an explosion, but a gentle unraveling. The towering, contorted form of the negation began to dissolve, its shadows softening into a river of shimmering, individual echoes. They were the final memories of lost children, the last thoughts of faded cultures, the quiet sighs of unmarked passings. Instead of vanishing into nothing, they flowed toward Alara, not as an attack, but as a final, trusting release. They poured into the echo stones at her hip. The crystals, already glowing, did not shatter under the weight of such immense sorrow. They transformed, their light deepening into a complex, beautiful luminescence that held both joy and grief, triumph and failure, as inseparable threads in a single, vast story. The burden she now carried was immense, a library of reconciled memory that would forever be a part of her. As the last echo found its rest, the heart of silence filled with a profound and gentle music. The realm of negation trembled, and the featureless gray around her fractured like a shell, revealing a shimmering pathway that spiraled away from the epicenter of the void. It was a road home, beckoning her back to a world waiting to be remade. The path home was a different world, where Alara had once crept through blighted plains and silent canyons. Life now hummed with a fragile but growing music. Her first stop was the Lake of Lost Echoes. The water still held its mirrored stillness, but the trapped, sorrowful chorus was gone. Kneeling at its shore, she held an echo stone over the surface. The crystal pulsed, and a wave of pure, reconciled memory flowed outward. The water did not ripple, but its cold, mirror-like sheen softened into a deep, vibrant blue, and from its depths rose a new sound, not the desperate overlapping of lost voices, but a single, harmonious melody of acceptance. The weeping guardian, now a being of flowing, stable light, emerged from the purified waters and bowed its head in a gesture of eternal gratitude before falling into step beside her, its presence a steadying force. This process of renewal was not a simple wave of a hand. Each landscape had its own unique wound, and each required a specific salve. In the high mountains, she did not just solve the old puzzles again. She sang the song of binding into the very stone, reinforcing the ancient carvings with the new harmony, making them permanently resistant to the silence's decay. The effort was deeply taxing. With each act of restoration, she poured a part of her own energy into the land, and the integrated echoes of the negation's sorrow would surge within her, bringing moments of overwhelming grief that made her want to sit down and weep. She learned to not resist these waves of sadness, but to let them flow through her and into the stories she told, transforming personal pain into universal empathy. Her allies became essential. The Lumina deer she had once healed appeared at the edge of the woods, its antlers blazing, and where it walked, the gray film on the flora vanished for good. The songbirds from the valley swarmed around her, carrying fragments of the restorative melodies to places her feet could not reach, seeding the harmony across the continent. Yet, stubborn pockets of silence remained, clinging to shadowy crevices and forgotten gullies like a spiritual infection. These were not battles of will, but of diagnosis. One such patch in the marsh required not a song of power, but a children's nursery rhyme, its simple, innocent rhythm being the only thing that could coax the darkness to release its grip. Another, in the canyon, needed only a long period of quiet companionship, as if the land itself had to relearn that it was not alone. This taught Alara that true healing was not a uniform process, but a practice of deep listening and tailored care. It was this understanding that led to her most enduring decision. At each major site of restoration, the lake, the mountain pass, the edge of the Blighted Plain, she constructed a simple way station. These were not grand monuments, but small, open shrines of gathered local stone. At their center, she placed a tiny, inert shard of an echo stone, and she taught the song of binding and the story of that place to any traveler who passed by. These way stations were her true legacy. They were not places of worship, but of active participation. They ensured that the knowledge of peace was not a relic to be guarded, but a living practice to be shared and maintained by everyone. As she finally neared the familiar hills that sheltered her village, the change in the land was undeniable. The air, once thin and heavy with the threat of forgetting, was now rich with the scent of blooming memory flowers and the distant, cheerful chorus of the songbirds. The very soil under her boots felt resilient and alive. A profound hope swelled within her, quieting the lingering sorrow she carried. She was no longer just a storyteller returning from a quest. She was a gardener returning to a field she had helped reseed, eager to see what had grown in her absence. The familiar path into the village felt both the same and entirely new. Alara stepped from the whispering woods to find the entire community waiting in the central clearing, from the eldest elder with hands gnarled by time to the smallest child clutching a parent's leg. A profound hush fell, not of silence, but of breathless anticipation. She did not need to speak of her trials. The journey was etched into her calm demeanor and the gentle, complex light pulsing from the pouch at her side. With steady hands, she drew out the transformed echo stones and placed them on a simple moss-covered pedestal in the village center. Their light did not blaze, but swelled, weaving together into a shimmering tapestry above the gathered crowd. The vision unfolded not as a loud spectacle, but as a shared dream. Everyone saw the first golden light of the world's dawn spilling over pristine mountains, felt the profound quiet of the first accord being forged between all living things, and heard the original, harmonious melody that underpinned creation itself, now renewed and fortified. It was a memory of pure peace, not as a forgotten ideal, but as a living, attainable state. Tears traced paths down weathered faces, and children stared with wide, wondering eyes. In that moment, the village understood its new purpose. They were no longer just a community living on the land. They were its designated keepers, the guardians of the Chronicles of the Dawn. The stones were immediately integrated into their daily life, placed at the center of the storytelling circle during evening gatherings, and the children began learning their first lessons not from scrolls, but by listening to the gentle hum of the crystals, learning the tones of compassion and unity. Yet a shadow of hesitation lingered for some. An older farmer named Kale, who had lost much in earlier, harder times, voiced the fear quietly. Are we not inviting that old sorrow back into our homes? He asked, his eyes fixed on the stones. Will these not attract the very shadows you fought? Alara did not argue with logic. That evening, she sat beside him, and instead of reciting a grand legend, she simply hummed the valley's wind melody. Then she invited others to share a small, personal story of a kindness they had received. One by one, voices rose, weaving a tapestry of simple, human connections. As they spoke, the echo stones glowed warmer, their light seeming to embrace the shared memories, demonstrating that they held joy as steadfastly as they held grief. Kale, eventually, shared a short tale of his own, and the tension in his shoulders eased. The choice for Alara was then clear and immediate. She would not wander as a lone guardian. She accepted the role of head storyteller, anchoring herself to the village that had raised her. Her life's work would be to teach, to guide the next generation in understanding that memory is not a passive thing to be stored, but a living practice to be nurtured. She showed them how to listen for the specific resonance of a healthy memory and how to use song to gently soothe a fractured one. This decision secured the peace, planting it deep in the fertile soil of community, but the weight was immense. She now carried the responsibility of guiding young hearts through the same challenges of fear and sorrow she had faced, hoping to arm them with empathy instead of just knowledge. As a great feast of celebration began, with music and laughter filling the air, a new, gentle breeze drifted down from the northern hills. It carried on it the faint, tantalizing scent of unknown blossoms and the soft, distant echo of a melody no one in the village recognized. It was a whisper of stories yet unheard, of lands waiting for their own echoes to be welcomed home. The First Chronicle began not with ink, but with silence. Alara sat for a long time before the blank parchment, the weight of her journey, a physical pressure in the quiet room, translating the symphony of lived experience and ancient echoes into fixed symbols, felt like a final, monumental test. Her hand trembled not from fatigue, but from the responsibility of choosing which truths would shape the future. She knew a sanitized legend of pure victory would be a beautiful lie, as fragile as the original piece. The true foundation had to be stronger, built on the unvarnished reality of how peace is lost and how it is won back through immense personal cost. She dipped her quill and began to write, weaving her own fears in the canyon with the peacemaker's plea from the lake, the echo smith's lesson in patience with the negation's devastating chorus of sorrow. This was not a record of events. It was a map of a soul's journey through the geography of memory itself. The completed chronicle became the village's new heartbeat. Young apprentices no longer began by memorizing simple fables. Their first lesson was to sit before the echo stones and feel the complex resonance of a reconciled memory, learning to distinguish the tone of shared joy from the deeper, warmer hum of acknowledged grief. Travelers setting out for the way stations were given copies of the text, not as a shield against the world, but as a guide for understanding it. The Chronicle's most radical section was its appendix of practical exercises, simple chants for calming a troubled mind, methods for listening to the stories held in an old stone wall, and questions to ask when meeting a stranger to learn their history without demand. Alara insisted that the most vital skill for a keeper was not storytelling, but deep listening. She wrestled deeply with the Chronicle's content, especially the chapter on the heart of silence. Including the full, agonizing weight of the negation's grief, risked passing on a legacy of despair. She spent sleepless nights grappling with this, the echoes of that sorrow still vivid within her. Ultimately, she chose to include it all, believing that to hide the depth of the wound would be to invite its return. True peace, she wrote, is not the absence of sorrow, but the courage to face it together and weave its threads into a stronger whole. This commitment to radical honesty set a powerful precedent. It ensured that future generations would understand the vigilance required to maintain their harmony, knowing that the silence was not a defeated monster, but a potential born from neglected grief. This knowledge itself became a pillar of their culture, a solemn reminder that memory is an active practice of care. The day she placed the finished chronicle beside the echo stones, a calm settled over her. The work was done. Stepping outside, she looked toward the horizon. There, at the edge of the whispering woods, the Lumina deer stood, its antlers casting a soft glow on the gathering dusk. Beside it, a figure of shimmering light, the weeping guardian, waited patiently. They were not there to celebrate the completion of a book. They were gathered as if awaiting the first word of the next chapter, their presence a silent question about stories yet to be lived and echoes yet to find their way home. The call went out not as a summons, but as an invitation, carried on the wind by the songbirds and resonated through the waters by the weeping guardian. They came from every corner of the known world, a convergence of beings as diverse as the memories they protected. The Lumina deer stepped from the woods, its antlers a soft beacon. The echo smith arrived with a satchel of humming minerals, and the spectral librarians from the Sunken Archive drifted at the edge of the gathering, their silent presence a solemn reminder of what had been almost lost. Ilara stood at the center of this unprecedented assembly, her heart full. This was the first gathering of guardians, a living network forged to ensure the peace would hold. The initial meetings were far from harmonious. The songbirds' constant, cheerful melodies clashed with the echo smith's need for quiet focus. The Lumina deer, attuned to the forest's subtle rhythms, grew restless with the weeping guardian's slow, deliberate pronouncements. Old tensions surfaced, whispers of past times when the lake's domain had ended where the forest began, and when the mountain's secrets were kept from the lowlands. Ilara did not command or dictate. She moved among them as a mediator, her own journey, a story they all shared. She reminded the songbirds of the patience required to mend a broken stone, and she asked the echo smith to listen to the protective wisdom in their simple tunes. Her role was not to erase their differences, but to help them see how those very differences created a stronger, more resilient whole. From these discussions, a new accord was born. It was not a rigid set of laws carved in stone, but a living document of shared responsibility. They agreed to regular exchanges. The songbirds would carry fragments of new melodies to the high mountains, reinforcing the ancient puzzles, while the weeping guardian would periodically cleanse the memory-laden waters of the marsh. The echo smith offered to teach others how to craft simple resonant stones for the way stations, ensuring the knowledge of repair was never again held by one person alone. This system of mutual support wove their world together with threads of shared purpose, creating a sustainable tapestry of care that spanned continents. This profound unity, however, came with its own weight. The network's very strength meant that a blight in the distant marsh, or a tremor of discord in the far mountains, was now a concern for every guardian. The risk of another all-consuming silence was dramatically reduced, but the price of their safety was eternal vigilance and a shared vulnerability. Any threat to one was a threat to all, binding their fates together in a new and solemn pact. As the first gathering concluded with a shared, harmonious tone that resonated from the village central stones, a hush fell over the departing guardians. A young village apprentice, a girl with wide, earnest eyes, timidly approached Alara, her gaze fixed on the glowing crystals. She carried a small, blank slate and a piece of chalk. "May I learn the stories?" she whispered, her voice full of a hopeful tremor. "Not just the happy ones, but the real ones. All of them." The wind carried more than the scent of pine that morning. It carried the subtle hum of a world beginning to heal. Alara led her young apprentice, Kale, to a quiet meadow at the forest's edge, placing a small, uncharged stone in his palm. Its surface was cool and smooth, a blank slate waiting for its first story. "Your first lesson is not to speak, but to listen," she instructed, her voice a soft guide. "Listen for the memory in the breeze, the story told by the rustling leaves." Kale closed his eyes, his brow furrowed in concentration. At first, he heard only the ordinary sounds of the woods. Then his breath caught. He could distinguish them, the separate threads of sound, the cheerful chatter of a long-gone squirrel, the whisper of a sapling's first growth, the gentle sigh of the soil after a rain. He was not just hearing, he was understanding. His natural aptitude was immediate and profound, a spark of pure connection that rekindled the fire of Alara's own purpose, reminding her why this work was essential. This raw talent, however, came with a restless energy. Impatient with simple listening, Kale soon tried to mimic the advanced binding songs he had overheard Alara practicing. One afternoon, he focused his will on his practice stone, attempting to force a harmony from a discordant patch of brambles. Instead of a melody, a sharp, discordant crackle of sound erupted from the stone. The effect was immediate and unsettling. Birds shot from the trees in a frightened cloud, and the small, burrowing creatures nearby froze in their tracks, their instincts screaming of a sudden, unnatural disturbance. The air itself felt frayed. Kale stared in horror at the stone in his hand, the weight of his mistake crashing down upon him. Alara did not scold him. She knelt beside him, her presence calm and steady. She placed a hand over his, gently covering the now dormant stone. "Every echo has its own time and its own place," she said softly. "To rush is to disrespect the story it holds." Then, she shared a story he had never heard, a tale of her own first failure at the Whispering River, of the moment her own fear and arrogance nearly cost her everything. She spoke not as a flawless hero, but as a fellow traveler who had also stumbled. This vulnerability transformed the moment from a reprimand into a bond of shared understanding, teaching him that responsibility was the true foundation of their craft. Kale's rapid progress was both a profound hope and a sobering responsibility. His ability to hear and weave harmonies suggested a potential that might one day eclipse Alara's own hard-won skills. Training a new generation was no longer just about preserving the past. It was about entrusting the future to hands that were both more capable and more untested. The long-term peace they had fought for now depended on this delicate transfer of wisdom. Later, as the sun dipped below the hills, Kale looked out at the darkening horizon, his eyes full of a new, thoughtful wonder. "The stories we have are so vast," he murmured, "but what of the lands beyond our valley? What chronicles are waiting out there, with no one to listen?" His simple question settled in Alara's heart, a quiet echo pointing toward uncharted chapters and whispers from a world still largely unknown. The message arrived not on parchment, but woven into the complex migratory song of a flock of sky singers. The birds settled in the village square, their usual cheerful melodies now carrying a strained, discordant undertone. A master weaver of sound was the first to understand the coded plea hidden within the rhythm. It was a call from a land across the great sea, a continent they knew only from half-remembered legends. There, the weaver explained, the very echoes of the land were fading for no clear reason, vanishing like mist under a sunless sky. A new kind of quiet was threatening to take root and ocean away. Ilara felt the weight of the world settle back onto her shoulders. Her first instinct was to go herself, to face this unknown challenge with the hard-won wisdom of her own journey. But her eyes fell upon Kale, who was listening with rapt attention, his practiced stone held tight in his hand. To leave now would be to abandon his training and the fragile network of guardians she had just helped build. The village was still learning to stand on its own, yet to ignore the call was a different kind of failure. It would be to build their peace on an island, willfully ignorant of a spreading sickness in the wider world. She looked at the faces of her people, at the young apprentices who had just begun to learn the songs of binding, and she knew her place was here, as the anchor. She would not be the lone hero answering every cry. She would be the leader who empowered others to become heroes themselves. The decision was a quiet storm within her. She would send a trained group, with Kale as their lead listener. To choose him was to risk the most promising future she had ever nurtured, to send a part of her own heart into a mystery she could not solve for him. She spent a full day and night preparing them, charging travel-sized echo stones with specific harmonies for diagnosis and protection. Her instructions were not a list of commands, but a sharing of her deepest experiences, how to listen for the subtle difference between natural quiet and imposed silence, how to offer a story before demanding an answer, how to recognize when a landscape's grief needed companionship more than a song. Trusting them was the culmination of all her growth. As the group departed at dawn, following the sky singers back toward the coast, Ilara watched them go with a heart divided between fierce pride and cold fear. Their mission globalized their purpose, weaving a new thread of responsibility across the vast ocean, but it also stretched their resources and understanding to a breaking point. They were now guardians of a world, not just a valley, and the unknowns they faced were immense. Turning from the empty path, Ilara's focus sharpened. If their world was now truly connected, then their home defenses needed to be stronger than ever. She walked toward the central stones, her mind already crafting new lessons for the remaining apprentices, preparing for any echo of that distant trouble that might one day find its way to their shore. The idea for the Festival of Echoes began as a simple seed in Ilara's mind, but it grew into a monumental undertaking that would test the very fabric of their newfound unity. She envisioned a grand gathering not of solemn ritual, but of shared joy, where the echo stones would be used not just for preservation, but for celebration. The first challenge was not philosophical, but profoundly practical. How do you host a continent-spanning event when your guests include songbirds, a being of living water, and a spectral librarian? The sheer logistics of organizing space, food, and a schedule that accommodated both daylight melodies and nocturnal light shows was a puzzle of epic proportions. Disagreements flared almost immediately. Some elders felt the festival should focus only on the triumphant legends of the Dawn Peace, the great victories and heroic figures, Others, remembering the painful honesty of Ilara's Chronicle, argued for a more balanced portrayal that included tales of hardship and recovery. Voices were raised in the village council, a stark contrast to the harmony they sought to celebrate. Ilara listened to every perspective, her own heart a mediator's chamber. She made a pivotal decision, one that would define the festival's soul. She insisted that the program must include voices from every background, especially those stories that had been historically overlooked or silenced. The first song performed, she declared, would not be an epic ode, but a simple weaving chant from a community that had once lived in the now Blighted Plain, a melody thought lost to the silence. This was not about creating a perfect narrative, but about weaving a tapestry so complete and diverse that every thread felt essential. Her resolve turned tension into collaboration. The festival's success was a revelation. It proved that collective joy, the act of creating beauty together, could be as powerful a shield against forgetting as any vigilant watch. The bonds between the different communities, from the mountain dwellers to the marsh folk, were reforged not through necessity, but through shared laughter and awe. Yet, as the festival grew in popularity and prestige, Ilara could not shake a quiet unease. This brilliant, concentrated beacon of memory and happiness was also a high-profile target. It gathered everything they held dear in one vulnerable, open space, a tantalizing focal point for any residual negativity lingering in the world's quiet corners. During the climactic ceremony, as hundreds of voices joined with the echo stones to create a single, soaring chord of light and sound that painted the night sky, a new note joined the symphony. It did not come from the ground or the gathered crowd. It descended from the stars themselves, a clear, harmonious signal, a single, pure tone that resonated perfectly with their song, as if in answer. The music faltered for a heartbeat as every eye, human and guardian alike, turned upward toward the vast, silent expanse, the echo of that celestial greeting hanging in the air. The celestial signal was a question etched in starlight. Ilara and the assembled guardians gathered in the village square, their combined focus turning the central echo stones into a lens aimed at the heavens. The signal did not speak in words, but in a resonant pattern of pure harmony, a mathematical music that mirrored the foundational song of their own world. They traced its origin to a specific constellation, one whose stars were not randomly scattered, but deliberately aligned to form an intricate glyph of interlocking circles. This was not a natural formation. It was a message, a final testament from the Dawn folk themselves, left behind as a beacon for the day their descendants could listen. Decoding it required more than just hearing. It demanded a perfect, unified resonance from the fully charged echo stones, a key to unlock a door left open for millennia. The process was a symphony of immense concentration. Ilara directed the guardians, each one contributing their unique resonance to the collective effort. The Lumina Deer's steady, grounding light blended with the Weeping Guardian's fluid harmonies and the Echo Smith's precise crystalline tones. For a long, tense moment, the combined energy wavered, the different frequencies threatening to cancel each other out. A single misaligned note would have shattered the connection, scattering the message into meaningless noise, or, worse, sending a distorted signal back into the void that could attract any manner of listening, unseen things. But their hard-won unity held. The glyph in the stars flared, and the message unfolded within their shared consciousness. It was not a history, but a revelation of cosmic context. Their world was not an isolated sanctuary, but one thread in a vast, living tapestry of realms, all bound by the same fundamental principles of harmonic balance. The Dawn folk had not just forged peace on their planet, they had learned to sing in tune with the universe itself, and they were passing on the techniques to maintain that delicate, interstellar accord. This knowledge was both a gift and a staggering responsibility. Peace was no longer a local concern, it was a cosmic duty. The message implied that a dissonance in their world could create ripples affecting neighboring realms, just as a harmony from beyond could strengthen their own. Alara understood that to hoard this understanding would be a betrayal of its very purpose. She immediately committed their community to a new path, leading a collaborative effort to construct a permanent observatory, a great listening station carved into the highest peak. Its design was a fusion of all their skills, with acoustically perfect chambers shaped by the Weeping Guardian, crystal lenses grown by the Echo Smith, and resonant towers designed to catch the subtlest stellar vibrations. This was not a fortress, but an open ear, a commitment to a broader, more humble understanding of their place in the cosmos. Just as the observatory's foundations were being laid, a familiar figure appeared on the road. Kale had returned. His journey had been a success. The fading echoes across the sea stabilized through patience and the shared songs he carried. But his eyes, older and more thoughtful, held a new mystery. The quiet he had healed was not a random decay, he explained. It was a symptom, a localized weakening that seemed to correspond with a larger, rhythmic pattern of dissonance he had detected in the cosmic background hum, a pattern that eerily mirrored the warnings in the newly decoded stellar message. The personal and the cosmic had collided. The local trouble and the celestial signal were not separate crises, but different notes in the same unfolding symphony, and Kale's ground-level experience now provided a critical key to understanding the scale of the harmony they were being asked to uphold. Kale's return was marked not by celebration, but by a weary silence that clung to his travel-worn cloak. He and his group had succeeded, teaching the songs of binding to communities across the sea, helping them restore the fading whispers of their own history. Yet his eyes, which had once sparkled with the joy of discovery, now held a deeper, more troubled light. He spoke of a different kind of challenge they had encountered, a place where the echoes did not fade, but multiplied. In this land, memories were not being lost. They were colliding, overlapping in a relentless, chaotic chorus that left the local inhabitants disoriented and unable to distinguish past from present. It was a storm of remembrance, and its cacophony was just as silencing as any void. Their success abroad had solidified the network's reach, proving that their methods could heal wounds across vast distances. But this new problem of echo overload presented a paradox that shook their understanding. Kale's disillusionment was palpable. If our answer to silence is to fill the world with sound, he asked, his voice low with fatigue, do we simply trade one form of suffering for another? Is a perfect, permanent harmony even possible? Or are we just managing an endless series of imbalances? Alara listened, her own heart holding the weight of his questions. She did not offer easy reassurance. Instead, she placed a hand on his shoulder and spoke with the calm certainty of one who had faced the heart of negation itself. "We do not seek perfection, Kale," she said. "That is the silence's old lie, the demand for a flawless, static world. True peace is a living balance, a constant, gentle adjustment, like the breath of the world itself. It requires listening for both the quiet and the noise." Then she made her proposal. "We will go together," she said. "We will study this chaos not as a failure, but as a new chapter in our understanding." The stakes of this new journey were fundamentally different. To ignore the overload was to risk a different kind of erasure, one where meaning itself was drowned out by a tidal wave of uncontrolled memory. It was a silence of confusion, a void of noise. Venturing into such an unstable territory meant navigating a landscape where every step could trigger a cascade of disorganized echoes, where the very tools of their craft could be turned against them. As they began their preparations, gathering resonant minerals and consulting the star charts from the observatory, Alara felt the Chronicles expanding in a way she had never anticipated. Each answer they found did not close a book. It opened a doorway to a library of new mysteries. The balance they sought was not a destination to be reached, but a path to be walked, one careful, listening step at a time. The land of echo overload was a symphony of beautiful madness. Alara and Kale stepped into a valley where the air itself shimmered with a visible, overlapping haze of sound and image. It was not silent, but its noise was a prison. A farmer might begin his morning planting only to be caught in a loop, reliving the same joyful memory of his son's birth a dozen times before noon, while his actual fields lay neglected. Children struggled to learn new skills as lessons from generations past bled into their present, creating a disorienting fog where time had no clear forward path. The local inhabitants moved with a dazed patience, their own identities frayed by the relentless chorus of their ancestors. The Guardian's first task was one of profound empathy, to listen without being consumed. Kale, his youthful energy tempered by his recent journey, proved invaluable. He quickly identified the core problem. Unlike the structured resonance of their own echo stones, the memories here were raw and dissonant, their natural harmonic dampeners having eroded over centuries. They could not simply silence the cacophony. To do so would be another form of erasure, a violence against the very cultural richness that defined this place. Instead, they worked with the local elders, who were desperate for clarity, but wary of outsiders. Some villagers, particularly the younger generation, who had known nothing but this constant inner storm, resisted fiercely. They saw the vibrant, chaotic tapestry of echoes as their heritage, a unique identity they feared losing to a sterile, imposed order. The team had to move carefully, demonstrating their methods on a small scale. Alara guided them in crafting specially tuned echo stones, not to capture the echoes, but to gently nudge them into harmonic alignment. It was like teaching a massive, unruly choir to sing in rounds instead of all shouting at once. They created resonant waypoints that acted as temporal anchors, allowing a person to step into a zone of clarity, to rest their mind before re-entering the vibrant, but now structured, memory field. The process was perilous. Several team members, including Kale, became momentarily trapped in powerful emotional loops, experiencing the profound grief of a long-ago funeral or the exhilarating fear of a first hunt, as if it were their own. It required immense mental discipline to recognize the echo as a story to be honored, not a reality to be lived, and to use the new harmonic stones as a lifeline back to the present. Ilara's leadership was decisive. She advocated not for suppression, but for curation. She helped the community design a living archive, a central grove where the most potent and beautiful echoes could resonate freely for those who sought them, while the general living spaces were gently calmed. This balanced solution respected the area's unique echo density, while granting its people the agency to choose when to immerse themselves in the past. Their success proved that echo stewardship was not a one-size-fits-all practice, but a flexible art of finding harmony within chaos. This hard-won stability, however, came with a sobering revelation. As they mapped the restored echo flow, they saw how delicately it was intertwined with the harmonic balance of distant lands, including their own. A major dissonance here had sent subtle shockwaves through the global network, and their intervention here had created a corresponding positive resonance back home. The world's memory was a single, breathing organism, as a newfound quiet, rich with structured meaning, settled over the valley. A formal invitation arrived. Carried by runners from a dozen different cultures, it summoned the Guardians to a grand summit. The goal was to formalize the principles of their craft, to create a shared doctrine of echo stewardship for all known peoples. Their local solution had become a global precedent. The Hall of the Sum, it was a forest of voices, each delegate a sovereign nation of memory with its own scars and triumphs. Ilara moved through the tumult not as a queen, but as a gardener tending fragile, new shoots of consensus. The air crackled with the friction of old fears. Delegates from lands once scoured by the silence argued passionately for strict, universal controls on echo usage, their proposals edged with the trauma of loss. They saw unregulated memory as a dangerous flame that must be contained. Others, from cultures rich with oral traditions, viewed such rules as a different kind of silencing, a cage for the living spirit of their history. The debate over sovereignty versus shared responsibility threatened to fracture the gathering before it truly began. Ilara listened, her own heart holding the echo of the negation's grief. She understood the desire for safety, but she also knew that control, born of fear, could become the very root of the next great silence. When she finally rose to speak, her voice carried the weight of her journey, but none of its arrogance. She did not present a finished doctrine. Instead, she told a simple story, the tale of the farmer and the songbird, of how a melody given away grew stronger than one fiercely guarded. She spoke of the Sunken Archive's spectral librarians, who asked for a living story, not a preserved relic. Her credibility, earned through sacrifice, allowed her to advocate for a document built not on rigid law, but on a foundation of empathy and adaptable principles. The accords of stewardship that emerged were a testament to this vision. They were not a list of commandments etched in stone, but a living guide written on resilient parchment. Its core tenets, focusing on deep listening, consent in the sharing of echoes, and the responsibility to aid other stewards in times of dissonance. The moment of ratification was not marked by a triumphant cheer, but by a profound, collective exhale. Copies were entrusted to swift messengers and resonant stones, destined for every corner of the networked world. This was Ilara's pinnacle, the culmination of a lifetime's work woven into a unified framework for peace. Yet, as she watched the delegates depart, She felt the weight of this victory settle on countless shoulders. The Accords were a beautiful, fragile vessel, and its safe passage now depended on the vigilance and wisdom of thousands. A single act of fear or arrogance in a distant land could send cracked spider webbing through the entire agreement. Later, under a sky freckled with early stars, Alara walked the familiar paths of her village. The air was sweet with the scent of night-blooming memory flowers, and the gentle hum of the central echo stones was a constant, reassuring presence. She passed the storytelling circle where she had first captivated listeners as a child, and the simple pedestal where she had placed the transformed stones upon her return. How far their quiet echoes had traveled. Her legacy was no longer a single chronicle or a set of principles. It was a living practice, now woven into the daily life of her community and spreading across the known world. It was a legacy that asked not for monuments, but for mindful attention in every shared story and every act of careful listening. The path ahead was no longer hers to walk alone, and in the gentle quiet of the evening, she found a deep and quiet peace in that thought. The true test of a restored world is not in its grand celebrations, but in its quiet preparations for the long night. Alara stood before the completed chronicle, a masterpiece of reconciled memory, and saw its single, physical form as its greatest vulnerability. A fire, a flood, a return of the old apathy, and everything they had rebuilt could vanish in a single moment. Her next project was born from this stark understanding, a final, monumental effort to weave their legacy into the very fabric of the world itself. She envisioned a living library with no central vault, where every copy of the Chronicles was an original, synchronized across a network of empowered communities. The technology existed in the Echo Stones themselves, but the scale was unprecedented. The plan required forging new stones not as singular treasures, but as humble, identical vessels, and then teaching stewards from every allied culture the precise harmonic ritual to copy and sync the core chronicles into their own local networks. This was not about hoarding knowledge in a few fortified citadels, but about planting a forest of memory so dense that no shadow could ever extinguish all its light. The initial coordination was a symphony of logistical headaches. A keeper from the northern mountains struggled to align his stone's resonance with a steward from the southern marshes, their local energies naturally attuned to different frequencies. A copied echo in one location might develop a slight tonal drift in another, a ghost of a regional accent that, over time, could distort the meaning of a foundational story. Ensuring perfect synchronization without imposing a rigid, soul-crushing uniformity became the project's central, delicate puzzle. Alara's most critical decision was to treat the solution not as a secret to be guarded, but as a lesson to be given away. She openly published the harmonic patterns and the synchronization methods, designing the entire system to be open source and teachable. She rejected the very idea of a central authority that could control or keep access to the Chronicles. When the time came to activate the first major nodes of the network, she did not stand at the central console. She placed the master resonance key into the hands of a young steward from the once echo-overloaded valley, a woman who had helped heal her own people through the new methods. The moment the network hummed to life, a soft, golden light pulsing in unison from stones in a dozen distant lands, was a victory deeper than any personal triumph. It meant the Dawn legends were no longer her burden to carry alone. They now lived in the hearts and hands of countless others, a shared inheritance that would outlast any single life. Watching the interconnected web of light stabilize, Alara felt the weight on her shoulders lessen, not with the relief of abandonment, but with the profound satisfaction of a job well done. Her direct influence, the need for her personal guidance, was beginning its gentle, necessary decline. The system was designed to be self-correcting, self-sustaining, a legacy that did not require its founder to survive. In the quiet that followed, she looked at the faces of the new generation of stewards, now confidently managing the flows of memory she had once wrestled with alone, and she understood that this was the true shape of a peace that could last for millennia. The fire crackled softly, its warm light dancing on the faces of the children gathered at Alara's feet. Under a blanket of stars, she told them the old stories, not with the aid of the glowing echo stones, but with the simple power of her own voice. She spoke of the whispering river and the Luminous deer, her words painting pictures in the quiet air. The children listened, utterly still, their eyes wide with wonder. In that moment, the Chronicles were not ancient artifacts locked in crystal, but a living breath passed from one generation to the next. The true magic, she realized, was not in the preservation of the memory, but in its sharing. A quiet hum, soft and slightly off-key, began beside her. It was the youngest girl, the shy one who rarely spoke, unconsciously weaving the harmonious wind melody from the valley into the space between Alara's sentences. The song had become a part of her, as natural as breathing. A complex emotion settled in Alara's heart, a bittersweet ache of profound pride, mixed with a gentle sense of her own obsolescence. Her hands, which had once fought shadows and mended stones, were no longer the only ones holding the light. She was becoming a character in the very tales she told, her own journey, a thread now woven securely into the larger tapestry. This quiet realization was not a loss, but a different kind of fulfillment. Later, in the deep stillness of the night, she unrolled a fresh piece of parchment. She would add one final entry to the Chronicles, a personal addendum from the storyteller to the stewards who would follow. Her words would not be a command or a conclusion, but a gentle reminder that peace is not a fortress to be built and defended. It is a practice, she wrote, a delicate rhythm like a heartbeat, renewed with every shared story, every act of listening, every child who learns the old songs. This acceptance was the final step in her long journey, a transition from being the seeker who saved the world to the sage who trusted it to save itself. As the children slept, their dreams full of luminous deer and singing rivers, Alara looked up. Her gaze found the familiar constellation, the celestial message forever etched in the night sky. Its silent, harmonious pattern seemed to pulse in time with the sleeping breaths around her. She felt the echoes of the first dawn not as a distant memory, but as a living promise, humming in the cool night air and in the hearts of the children, a legacy of endless tomorrows waiting to be sung into being. The air above the village did not merely brighten, it began to sing. A soft, pervasive hum resonated from the central stones, a call that was felt more than heard. From the whispering woods and the high mountains, from the placid lake and the distant marsh, the guardians came. The Luminous deer stepped into the clearing, its antlers a constellation of living light. The weeping guardian flowed from the river, a pillar of serene, liquid radiance. The echo smith arrived with a satchel of stones that chimed in perfect harmony, and the spectral librarians drifted at the edges, their silent presence a bedrock of memory. They gathered in a vast circle, joined by stewards from every allied culture, each holding their own empowered echo stone. At the center stood Alara, not as a commander, but as a conductor awaiting the first note of a symphony that would redefine their world. She raised her hands and a profound stillness fell, a silence filled not with absence, but with potential. Then she began the recitation. It was not a single story, but the great accord itself, the foundational melody of creation. Her voice was the first thread, and as she spoke, the guardians and stewards joined her, their voices and the resonant stones weaving together into a tapestry of sound and light. This was not an act of force. The harmonic field that bloomed from their unison did not push against the world. It enveloped it, a gentle, pervasive energy that seeped into the soil and the sky. It sought out the last, stubborn pockets of the old silence, not to erase them, but to listen, where it found a whisper of the negation's grief, a lingering echo of fear or sorrow. The field did not attack. It absorbed the dissonance, holding it within the vast, compassionate chorus. The painful memories were not destroyed, but transformed, their sharp edges softened as they were woven into the larger narrative, becoming new layers of depth and understanding within the universal song. In that climactic moment, Alara opened herself completely. She felt the immense, integrated sorrow of the negation, not as a separate enemy, but as a part of her own heart, a grief shared by all living things. She did not resist it. She embraced it with a universal compassion, proving that true, enduring peace is not the absence of pain, but the courage to make room for it within a greater harmony. The light that surrounded her then was not a blinding flash, but a steady, enduring luminescence that seemed to stitch her story into the very fabric of reality. She became a living legend, not as a distant figure of myth, but as a permanent resonance within the world's memory, a testament that every echo, whether of joy or sorrow, has its place in the beautiful, unending song. The final chapter of Alara's story was written not on parchment, but in the quiet confidence of the stewards she had trained. She watched them now, these young men and women who had once been wide-eyed children at her feet, as they guided travelers through the living library, their voices calm and sure as they explained the delicate harmonies of a restored echo. The Chronicles were no longer a static record she protected, but a dynamic conversation, constantly being expanded with new stories from across the networked world. Her own legendary journey was simply one thread in a vast and growing tapestry, a foundational story that gave others the courage to begin their own. She had evolved from the hopeful seeker who braved the whispering river into a living symbol of the peace she helped forge, her presence now a gentle resonance woven into the very atmosphere of the village. The time came for her to step back from active duty, to pass the responsibility of the central stones to Kale and his council. There was no grand ceremony, only a quiet transfer of a simple, resonant key. Her work was complete, yet her absence was not an emptiness. You could feel her influence in the way a young storyteller paused to truly listen to an elder's rambling tale, finding the profound truth hidden within. You could hear it in the gentle melody a mother hummed to her child, a tune that was both a lullaby and a lesson in harmonic balance. The Dawn legends were no longer artifacts to be remembered. They were principles to be lived, a daily practice of empathy and shared memory. Ilara's greatest legacy was this seamless transition, the proof that a single voice had not just challenged the void, but had taught an entire world how to sing in chorus, ensuring that the wisdom of the time before history would forever illuminate a future of limitless, harmonious tomorrows.